Welcome to Peninsula Seniors Out and About. We're back at Trump National Golf Club for the 21st annual Palos Verdes Concours d'Elegance. The theme this year is Age of Elegance. Let's go and have a look at some of the automobiles. I'm here with Peter Brock. He's the Grand Marshal here for the 21st annual Concours d'Elegance. Peter, congratulations.
Well, thank you. It's a real honor to be down here. It's actually, I spent a lot of time down here a few years ago when I lived in this area, but it's good to be back.
You are an innovative and very creative designer of cars. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I got interested in cars as a kid when I was about 12 years old. Got my first job working in a garage and just fell in love with automobiles, and they happened to be building some race cars in there, and that's what I decided that was a very exciting career. And if people could make a living doing something like that, well, I'd stay with it. And that's what I've done all my life.
Well, I understand not all your life. You've been involved in a little something else that's a little more dangerous. Can you talk about that?
Well, I spent a few years in the ultralight flight business. I had a shop up in El Segundo, and it's interesting that the whole world of ultralight flight started right here on Torrance Beach. Most people don't know that. But the hang glider was invented in Australia and then migrated over here, and we developed the first really safe hang glider, and we were able to fly and sustain flight, and we did those flights down at Torrance Beach. So that became a real big business for us for a few years. Actually, it put us out of business because of product liability. This is such a litigious society that if you've got anything dangerous, you're going to lose. So we finally closed the business down, but it was probably one of the most exciting eras of my life.
Race cars and hang gliders, I mean, really, doesn't get much better than that.
Yeah, well, most people don't realize in hang gliding that even though we started just flying right down here on the beach at Torrance, the gliders got better and better and better. We really reinvented the airplane, and we were soon flying off the mountains out in Silmar and out in San Bernardino, and we were able to thermal and climb. And by the time the sport really peaked, in the United States at least, we were flying up in the Owens Valley at altitudes of 17,000 feet, and we were going 300 miles. So from just hopping off the sand dunes down here at Torrance Beach in 5 years, that's how fast it progressed. It was really an amazing era, and it's so exciting to be part of it.
Well, back to the Concours here.
Yeah, right, yeah.
What did you bring to the Concours? Can you talk about your cars?
Sure. I brought my own modern Daytona Cobra Coupe. This is a modern version of the car that I designed for Carroll Shelby back in 1964. We built it specifically to race against Ferrari in the World Championship. The original 6 cars were built in a little shop over in Venice when we were a very small company before Ford Motor Company really got heavily involved. And we built 6 of these cars, and we went to Europe and raced them against Ferrari. And it's the only American car to ever win a world championship. So it was a very satisfying program. Before that, actually, I'd worked for Bill Mitchell and Harley Earl at General Motors, and worked on the design of the Stingray. So I've had a hand in working with some of the most exciting, interesting people in the business, and working on the team that developed both the Stingray and the Cobra.
It doesn't get much better than that.
No, it's been a good run. I really enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Well, can we have a closer up look of the car you brought?
Sure, Betty. What we're looking at right here is a modern version of the Daytona Cobra Coupe. Only 6 of these cars were built originally for Carroll Shelby's racing team to run against Ferrari in 1964 and 65. And at that time, this was considered a very radical design with this chopped off back end. Nobody had ever seen anything like this in the United States. The Europeans had been working with this idea for a couple of years, but it had been determined that actually bringing the back end to a point like a teardrop, which most people thought was the most efficient form, really wasn't, because from the practicality of the street, the thing had to be too short, and it created too much turbulence. So if you could fool the wind coming over the car and then chop it off, it turned out to be more efficient. And if you look at most modern cars today, they're all chopped off at the back end and they have fairly flat roofs. So that all developed from this particular car, and it's now an accepted design premise. This particular version of the Daytona Cobra Coupe is almost identical to the original race cars. For the production version, just to make it a little bit more comfortable, we extended the wheelbase about 3 inches. Other than that, the proportions are almost identical to the original race car. The original cars had a 289 Ford engine that came out of a Ford Fairlane sedan. They put out about 385 horsepower in race version. This particular car on the street has a LS7 Corvette engine in it, and it has 505 horsepower. So even though it's a touring car and a lot more comfortable, it's actually faster and quicker than the original race car. So the lines are quite lovely because there really is designed from a standpoint of function, and they were originally developed some lines that I learned what the Germans were doing in 1930. I'm a student of history and found some papers on aerodynamic design and applied those principles to this car. But when it was first proposed, the thing looked so radical that there was a lot of resistance to doing it. But slowly, as we got the car built, more people began to warm to the idea, and we took it out to Riverside the first time and ran it, and we were 3.5 seconds a lap faster than everything else. And the most importantly, we went from 165 mile an hour to 185 mile an hour, and we found out that we were getting about 25% more fuel efficiency. And that fuel efficiency is something as I mentioned before, is now worked into all modern cars. So it completely changed the way we look at automobiles today. This car is really a trend-setting car in many ways. It's the things that you're looking at were designed back in 1964, and now they're fairly well accepted in practice for race car design and certainly a lot of production cars. One of the most interesting factors on this car is that the air exits out of this large exit vent here. So the air comes in for the radiator in the front and then comes up out over the top. Now that's a very practical way to get rid of the air so it doesn't go in and overheat the engine compartment area. But the most important thing it does is, if you look at the shape of the car, it's fairly round. So anytime that you have air increasing in velocity, you lower the pressure and the car wants to lift. It's almost like an airplane wing. So by having the air come out of here with this little raised area in the front, it spoils that lift and keeps the front end on the ground, because the car will go about 200 miles per hour. Again, the same principle is applied here on the windscreen. The air flowing over the car at this area is its highest speed, so it's the lowest pressure. So you'll notice these little vents in here, and what this does is it sucks all the air out of the cockpit and keeps it constantly recirculating. So it's a pretty innovative car in using airflow to create a lot of comfort without having to use air conditioning. This is really an interesting combination, because we've got a car here that was designed in 1964, but we've got the latest Corvette engine, which is really an incredibly powerful engine. We've got about 505 horsepower out of this LS7 engine, which is fuel injected, and it gets much better mileage, and of course a lot more power than we originally ran. If you look down on the side here, the headers are all stainless steel and they're all tuned. That little bundle of snakes that comes off the side here helps it breathe really well and run. So the car is very comfortable. It's got air conditioning, power steering, so it's got all the comforts of a modern automobile, and yet it still retains the lines of the original 1964 race car. So everything is made to give it the efficiency of a modern automobile and yet have all the advantages of the original styling that we used on the World Championship car in 1965. Entering the Daytona Coupe is rather interesting. It's rather like climbing into an airplane, because the doors are rather small, and that stems from the original design of the race car. And if you look on the inside, it's fully instrumented. When you have a high-performance engine, it's really important to keep track of all of those things. You'll notice there's no radio in here. The sounds for me are of the engine and all the mechanical parts of the car working, or the music for me. The driving the Daytona Coupe is a very interesting experience, because when this car was originally designed as a race car, the main effort in design was to keep the frontal area as low as possible and keep the air flowing around it as smoothly as you could. So it's very much like an airplane cockpit. It's really a lot of fun to drive. It's very tight, and yet it's very, very comfortable inside. You can go long, long distances in it, and with very little effort. And with this amount of power, you can use when you get out on the open road. It's very, very comfortable to cruise, and it gets exceptionally good gas mileage, running at least 25 miles per gallon, which is pretty exceptional for a high-performance car with that sort of horsepower. It's probably one of the most fun cars I've ever had.
I'm here with Mark Mercedes. And what did you bring to the Concours today?
We have a 1965 Di Tommaso that was designed by Peter Brock, and it was made with a Fantuzzi body. It's a one-of-a-kind car. There's only one in the world. And I came to buy the car last year in Belgium. I was looking at some cars, and they happened to have both the Di Tommaso P70, which is what we brought today, and the Sport 5000, which is a European version of it that was used for racing in Europe, and decided to buy the cars and bring them to the US. So it's pretty exciting cars because it's just so unique, and there's only one done, and I'm really glad to see that Peter is here, the designer of the car, and he's explaining some of the background of what he's done with the car and how he came about building it and designing it. It's very fascinating.
How did you happen to buy this car? How did you choose this one?
Well, I fell in love with the history of it. As I said, I was looking at some cars in Belgium, and they had lots of cars, and I said, well, what is this car? I said, well, it's the Di Tommaso P70. He said, well, who designed it? I said, Peter Brock. Wow. So let's go look at some of the documentation and the history and all that. This is just absolutely unbelievable that such a car exists. What happened with this car was that the kind of history of it is unknown. Really, when Di Tommaso died in 2004, the car was found in his warehouse, broken apart, and then it was brought back together and put back together in 2006. So from 1965 to 2006, the car had disappeared. It just didn't even exist for the world. And the only car people could see, was the Sport 5000, which was sitting in the museum at Di Tommaso, and it was again sold in 2004 when he died. So everybody until 2006 timeline thought that the Sport 5000 is what was what Peter Brock had designed. Well, when the parts were really found and the car was reassembled is when they realized that there was a European version and an American version that was done. So
thank you so much for bringing it to the Concours today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
and
it.
could I have you give a closer up look?
And as you could see, the form is designed in such a way that the windscreen blends in with the front body of the car, so the contour is the same. And as you sit inside, of course, your head is going to be sticking out, but that's by design. One of the other unique features is the way that the air intakes are, and the wind break in the back. This was very unique. It took, I think, 20 years until Ferrari started incorporating such features into their cars with the F40. We've got a Ford engine with gurney heads, with the 180 exhaust. The sound is just absolutely fantastic when you run this car. It's really an amazing drive because it's so powerful, and as you're driving, all you hear is just the engine sound, and it's just got an incredible sound. Obviously, it's a race car, so it drives like a race car. It's not obviously a comfortable car to drive around, but obviously there's no other car like it, so you get a lot of looks, and that obviously it's interesting for people.
I'm here with Tony Rackley. And what did you bring to the Concours today? There's always a story with every car you
Today
bring.
we bought our 1933 Duesenberg Model J Rolston Torpedo Victoria. And it was built in 1933. It was ordered by a chap called E.T. Foley, who was very instrumental in America's highways and bridges and railways. And he ordered the car. Gordon Berwick was involved in the design of the car, went to Rolston in New York for its manufacture. And then E.T. Foley had it he was in Minnesota for a while, and then he came out to California, and he was here for a couple of years, and then he sold the car to Hopalong Cassidy. So when it was
Hopalong Cassidy, wow.
William Boyd. And apparently he had a trailer for the car. The car at the time was red, and it had flared fenders, and it had the hubcaps and a few other different things.
Well, can we have a closer up look?
And here's some of the features on our 1933 Duesenberg. Firstly, right from the very start, you see the front. It has what's called a moustache front bumper system. It looks, very similar to a moustache. And then coming back, we have the Pilot Ray turning lights. They actually turn with the steering, so when you went around the corner, they showed around the corner. And then the massive headlights, and then the grille. And these louvers are thermostatically controlled, so they would open when the engine got hot. And on the hood, we have what's called the Duesenberg. It was designed by one of the Duesenberg brothers. And the heart of the Duesenberg is the engine. 420 cubic inches, 265 brake horsepower, which at the time was 100 horsepower more than any other car. Duesenberg was the first company in America to actually incorporate a straight 8 engine into a car. And as you can see, it's like a work of art. Okay, one of the unique features with our particular car is it's one of the only known Duesenbergs to have a double belt line. So you can see here, the belt line here goes along across the hood. The belt line comes down and ends at the tail here. As I mentioned before, this car is called a Torpedo Victoria. The Victoria part is the fact that the rear passengers do not have any vision from the sides. It's a blind rear quarter. That's the Victoria part. The Torpedo part is the protrusion at the back. It's the large trunk. This actually has an inbuilt trunk, which was rare for that era. The unique feature of this car, it actually has windshields in the seats so the people in the back could have wind deflection. Okay, one of the unique features of this particular car is it has freewheeling. It was known to only have been fitted to 3 Duesenbergs. This is the only one known to exist. And what it does is once engaged, when you take your foot off the gas, it would actually be freewheeling and you wouldn't be driving the engine, so it would save gas. It was something that was very uncommon on an expensive car. You'd find it on a cheap car for them trying to save gas. Another feature is it has adjustable suspension. It's the only one known to exist. Also, another feature is it has adjustable brakes, which is one of 3 cars known to exist. And one of the other unique features with this particular car is it actually has a disappearing top. But what's unique about it is the fact that with this hole and this handle, one actually cranked the roof back. When you first purchased a Duesenberg back in the 1930s, what you actually purchased was the chassis and the engine and the grille and the fenders, which was $8,500. Then you went up to a coach built company and they would build you a car. This was Rolston, which was one of the high-end companies at the time. Rolston name actually was cheekily stolen from Rolls-Royce. They would later change the name to Rolston. This car, built in New York, high-dollar car, time new, it was $19,000. There's one other famous Rolston-bodied car, and that's known as 20 grand. So this one was $1,000 cheaper, so I can afford to take some people to lunch if they'd like to go.
I'm here with Ray Johnson. He's the exhibition chairman for the Concours d'Elegance. There are world classics here. Can you talk about how these classic cars are found?
Well, Betty, what we do is we first decide on a theme for the show, and this year it's Age of Elegance, which really does feature the pre-war classics. And then to represent elegance, probably the most elegant is Duesenberg. So we have a very, very exceptional class of Duesenbergs here. And then, of course, Rolls-Royce and Bentley. And then Dietrich, Raymond Dietrich was a coachwork designer, made very elegant designs. And so we have 2 classes of all Dietrich cars. And the class managers, they go out, they go to other shows, they know the people, they meet people, they get recommendations, and they find the cars.
How many classes of cars do we have here today?
Well, including the special Brock exhibit that we have 21 classes of cars, 20 regular classes, and then the special Brock exhibit. And we have a wide variety. It's not just the pre-war classics. We've got sports cars, we've got muscle cars. We even have a small class of fire trucks as a special event this year.
Can you talk a little bit about the charities that benefit from this event?
Well, this goes to 2 organizations. One, the PV Art Center, but also the Palos Verdes Rotary. And the Rotary focuses their money on the Boys and Girls Club of San Pedro, so we support those organizations.
I'm here with Jack Nethercutt. You have an amazing museum. Can you talk just a little bit about that?
Oh my, yeah, it's in Sylmar, California, which is at the north end of the San Fernando Valley. And it is open to the public, free of charge. We do tours on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Otherwise, the museum across the street is open from Tuesday through Saturday. What else can I tell you? There's guided tours. that really the way to go see it is to phone up, get on the tour, do that, which shows you quite a few of the cars. It also shows you all the musical instruments, and we have the third largest Wurlitzer theater organ in the world. We do concerts. They play it for the tour. Then you can go across the street to another building that has about 150 cars on display. And you can see that. And if you care to, you can go behind that building for a guided tour on a steam locomotive and a fully restored parlor car.
You have an amazing collection, and from your collection, you brought the 20 Grand today. Thank you so much. Can you talk a little bit about the car?
The 20 Grand is probably our flagship car. It's one of the more famous cars. A lot of people in the car world know what the 20 Grand is. It was a Duesenberg that was built for the 1933 Chicago World's Fair. It was actually sold the next year in 34 for $20,000, and that's why it got the name of 20 Grand, because in those days $20,000 was a bunch of money in the middle of the Depression. My father got the car. It was actually restored in 1979. We've touched it up here and there a little bit, but basically it's that restoration from 1979.
Oh, well, thank you so much again for bringing it. Can you give us a closer-up look?
All Duesenbergs were actually, they left the factory in as a chassis with just the running gear, and they went to various different builders. This particular car was built by a coach builder named Ralston, who was very famous for building Duesenbergs. This is a one-of-a-kind car. There is no other Duesenberg that looks like this. The engines and all are the same with all Duesenbergs, either blown or naturally aspirated. But this car is very special because it was the World's Fair car. The Duesenberg engines were so far ahead of their time. Most engines in that era would put out 120 to 140 horses. This particular engine puts out 340 horsepower. It is supercharged, which you can see right here. The interior of the 20 Grand is a little unusual, especially the back seat. It is built for actually just two people, but it has its own dashboard of speedometer, clock, etc. So the people in the back know exactly how fast the driver is going.
I'm here with Richard Law, and what did you bring to the Palos Verdes Concours today?
I brought this 1931 Model J Duesenberg that is right behind us.
And how did you happen to find this car, and what's the history of this car?
Well, I've owned it a long time. I looked for a Duesenberg for many years, and I finally found this one in 1984. But it has an interesting history. It was originally a Hollywood car, as quite a few Duesenbergs were, but it belonged to Walter Wanger, the film producer. And he made movies you might have heard of, the Marx Brothers movies. He made a number of other movies up through the 50s, and his wife was Joan Bennett. There's other interesting things about the history. It had a number of owners after that, not such illustrious owners, but in the 50s it belonged to a company called Pacific Auto Rentals, and they used to rent cars to movies. And in 1956, this was the featured car in the movie Giant, and it was driven by Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor and James Dean. So it's actually been in several movies after that.
Well, it's got some amazing history.
Interesting, yeah.
Yes. Can you give us a closer-up look at some of the features?
Sure. As you can see, it's a convertible sedan. Also, the long wheelbase. Duesenbergs had two wheelbases. This is the 153.5-inch wheelbase, so it's very, very roomy inside. The back seat has a particularly large amount of leg room and comfort. It also has an interesting design feature, which is maybe a little hard to see from there, but it has a cowl that wraps all the way around, and so when the door closes, that cowl sweeps the whole way around the dashboard. And That's a kind of a unique feature that makes it look more like a Phaeton than a convertible sedan when the top's down and all the windows are down. As you can see, the engine is a very showy engine. Engines in those days, especially on the luxury cars, were designed to attract a lot of attention, and this is about as showy as it gets with all the bright work and polished aluminum and so forth. This is a straight 8 engine, 420 cubic inches, dual overhead cams. You can see these are where the camshafts are for the engine. It had 265 horsepower, which was far more horsepower than any other car in that era. The only other car that had more was the supercharged Duesenberg, which had 325. It's actually a fun car to drive. I've driven this car a lot. I've had it since 1984, and I've driven it to a lot of shows, and it's a great car, fun to drive. It drives at freeway speed, no problem. It's big and it's heavy. Once you get used to it, you can handle it pretty well. And it has full instruments. It has a tachometer. It has an altimeter. It has a time clock that has a sweep second hand and all. You can time it for rallies. So these cars were designed to be used and have fun in and all that, and definitely it still is.
I'm here with Tom Hartman, and you brought this beautiful Duesenberg to the Concours this year. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, it's a 1933 Durham Tourster. It's kind of interesting. We bought it from Otis Chandler, the publisher of the Los Angeles Times, and we have photos of when President Roosevelt in 1933 got out of this car at the Rose Bowl.
Oh, wow.
So it's a pretty famous car.
Could we have a closer-up look?
Sure. This is a Model J engine and Model J car, J504. It's a straight 8-cylinder with double overhead cams, and it's got all sorts of intricate oiling and lubrication things that move when the engine is working. It's almost like a piece of jewelry, the way it's polished aluminum and bright green paint. The Duesenberg engines were all painted the bright green. This car has paint that is called Envy Green. It was one of those cars where you probably wanted to be seen just in a certain company in the 1930s because it was the most expensive, one of the most expensive cars available at the time. And in the back seat of our beautiful car is our beautiful daughter, Skylar. Skylar, would you like to say anything?
I'm enjoying this car, and I think it's an awesome car.
In addition to the mechanical features of the car, one of the things that we found interesting was the floor material. It's actually made out of green linoleum to match the car's paint scheme, and was done because the car was used for hunting originally, and it was a lot easier to clean up than any other material available. And as you can see, it's got a machine dashboard with all the gauges that you need to monitor the performance of the car.
I'm here with Fred Lax, and what did you bring to the Concours today?
This is a 1934 Auburn V12, made in 1934 in Auburn, Indiana. It's one of 27 they built that year, and only one of 3 survivors.
Is this the original color?
This is the original color, cream and red, and it's a deeper red, which I like.
Could we have a little closer-up look of the car, and you could show us some of the features?
Absolutely. Okay, so let's take a look at the engine. As I mentioned, it's a V12, 371 cubic inches, about 160 horsepower, but it will obtain speeds of over 100 miles an hour. It's got dual carburetors, dual exhaust. It has a Bijur system, which it lubricates the chassis and the components of the car. It has the dual headlamps, which are coated in silver metallic paint on the lenses, which is authentically correct. It also has dual pilot ray driving lights, which turn as the car turns. They're connected to a reticulating arm attached to the steering column, and so they turn with the car. It's got 4 doors, suicide doors, convertible top, dual vacuum-controlled windshield wipers. It's got very finely detailed and engraved dash panel. The trunk on these Phaeton salons was made by Potter Company in Michigan. And as you can see, it has the original hubcap wrench. These wheels have no lug nuts. They just have a spinner hubcap, and you just unscrew that and the wheel just pops right off.
I'm here with Elaine Darwin, And this concours is amazing.
Yes, this is a fabulous event today, probably one of the best in the state of California. And judging from the cars that are here, the competition is fairly fierce and exciting. And it's nice to meet you today.
Nice to meet you too. Who's your little pal here?
This is Jules. Jules, our little therapy dog.
Aw.
She is my husband's therapy dog, and
she's adorable.
Takes care of us. Yes, thank you.
And what did you bring to the concours today? Other than Jules,
Other than Jules, we brought our favorite 1937 Cord 812 supercharged Phaeton. We've owned the car for 2.5 years, and we've been showing it this year, and it's been a lot of fun. This car is one of 196 supercharged Phaetons that was built by the Cord company, and this was at the end of its run, 1937. We are very honored to have this car. It was originally delivered to someone who lives in Pennsylvania. It's traveled around the United States and spent 30 years at the Cord Auburn Duesenberg Museum in Indiana. The car has less than 30,000 miles on it. It's wearing 90% of its original paint. It has original glass, both windshield, side windows, and rear window. The chrome is original, and the interior of the trunk is totally original. It's very rare to find original tools and jack, original spare tire, and carpeting. The car has been highly maintained, and we're continuing to enjoy it and show it at concours all over the country. So I'd like to introduce you to Jay Dean. He is our mechanic who maintains the Cord. I'll let him tell you all about the interior of the engine compartment.
Cord was quite revolutionary in their design because most of the cars were front-wheel drive. The engine is a Lycoming V8, and this particular model is supercharged. But again, the biggest part of the Cord is the front-wheel drive unit. It was very revolutionary in its time. I think that's why the cars didn't take off that well in popularity, because people were a little bit nervous of the front-wheel drive. But they actually drive extremely well. The cars came with hydraulic brakes and what's called a pre-selector gearbox, which is vacuum electric shifting. So you just literally shift it with 2 fingers, depress the clutch, and that's what changes the gears. The flathead V8 for its day was quite commonly used, but in the supercharged version it definitely had a lot more horsepower to it. Even though that they're quite a heavy car, the car still drives extremely well. I'd like to show you the interior and the dashboard on the car. It is all original, but just been cleaned and polished. Everything is functional. This particular car has a factory radio, but the interior of the Cord is just a beautiful piece of Art Deco.
I'm here with Aaron Weiss. And what did you bring to the concours today?
A 1933 Packard 12-cylinder 2-door convertible coupe.
And how did you happen to buy this car?
Well, my buddy in St. Louis, Mark Hyman, had it for sale, and I couldn't live without it.
It's gorgeous. Can we have an up-close and personal look at it?
The inside of the car has been fully restored. It has a cognac interior. You can see by the tuck and roll with the buttons, that was pretty much the standard 12 design for the year. All of the wood-grained fascia and door sills. This was unique to the 12s. If you look at a Super 8 or an 8, it's going to be a little bit more plebeian. Engine compartment has been totally refurbished. You can see that the manifolds have all been porcelainized, which was correct for that period of time. They didn't paint the exhaust manifolds or leave them raw. The entire engine has been rebuilt, and all of the colors and the bright work has been restored to its original specifications. A lot of people think that Lexus, with their rotating front headlights, were something revolutionary, but back in 1933 we had Pilot Rays, and these lights turn with the car. So as the steering wheel turns and the wheels turn, the lights turn to light your way. Another option on the car was this grill guard. You can see through the original chrome-plated shutters, but dealers would sell a grill guard so that rocks that would hit the front of the car wouldn't damage the shutters. If you look at the detail on the headlights, the top is all engraved. The Packard 12s were the top of their line, and one of the distinguishing characteristics was the pinstriping, which was different from a Super 8 and a Standard 8. And if you see these double lines that run across the belt line of the car, this was distinctively Packard 12, where the other ones might have only been a single line. The hubcaps on the Packard 12s were also distinctive inasmuch as they had a cloisonne center and ring around that said Packard 12 and the black rings that went around the perimeter of the cap. And those were all very unique to the 12-cylinder and made it stand out above the lesser models they produced that year. In the world of American automobiles, the three Ps, Packard, Peerless, and Pierce Arrow, were considered the top of the line. Packards were known for the quietness and smoothness of the engines, and so when we start this up on most days, you can't even hear it start. In fact, sometimes you're not sure it started. And very, very quiet car, very smooth to drive, excellent suspension, great acceleration, even the brakes work.
I'm here with Jack Nethercutt again. He brought another car. And can you tell us a little bit about the car here behind us?
Well, this is a 1923 McFarlane. There are actually very few McFarlanes still left. They were not that popular a car. The engine in it is 572 cubic inches. It produces about 120 horsepower out of 6 cylinders. The main thing about this car is that it was Fatty Arbuckle's car. The studio actually owned the car, but Fatty drove it, and wherever he went for his movie shoots, etc., he was in this car. At the back end of the car, there's an awning that gets up, and the trunk was always full of booze, because that was Fatty.
Jack, I just want to say thank you so much for supporting the Palos Verdes Concours.
It's our pleasure. We have a good time when we come down here.
And you brought a car that's behind us. It's a very special car. Can you talk about it?
Well, it's special really to the family. This car was the first car that my father restored, and he finished restoring it in 1958. It was not the first car he purchased. He actually bought a 1936 Duesenberg, but could not take delivery on it. So as he was driving home, he passed the gas station and he saw this car in it. And so he went in and he bought the car. And if you can imagine, he paid all of $500 for this car. Well, he restored it, took him about a year and a half, and $65,000. In those days, that was a lot of money. And in 1958, in August, he and my mother drove it to Pebble Beach on newly tarred road. So when we got up there, they had to get down underneath the car and pull all this tar off and polish it. And as a result, he won Best of Show and set the parameters for how a car should be restored from then on. And that's why this car is so very special to the collection. It is a 1930 DuPont town car. It holds a spot in our hearts very much because it was his first. DuPont actually was a conglomerate of things. DuPont basically took bits and pieces and put together a car. So it's not that different a car.
Well, thank you for bringing it to the Concours this year. Appreciate
You are
it.
more than welcome.
I'm here with Dana Graham at the Concours d'Elegance. How many cars did you bring this year?
I brought 2.
And what did you bring?
I brought this Chrysler 1932 Chrysler Imperial convertible sedan behind us, and the 1929 Packard dual cowl Phaeton.
Well, can we have a look at the Chrysler first?
The first thing you probably notice is this grille here. This is actually an aftermarket rock guard, because these cars have what they call a winter front, which is a set of vertical vanes behind this that open and close depending on how hot the car is. So you can't have rocks going into between those vanes and knocking out your radiator. So you have this rock guard, which also is cosmetically kind of nice looking. These are 32 candle power headlights, and then you've got driving lights here. If you have it all on, you're still not anywhere close to a modern headlight. The Chrysler Corporation never made a bigger engine than a straight 8. They never made a 12, they never made a 16. So this is the engine that was in the early 30s Imperials,
and in fact was the engine that Chrysler carried right up until the early 50s when they came out with a V8. Okay, now we're inside the car, and if you're used to looking at these cars, which nobody is because there's only 4 of them, the first thing you'll notice is the radio. That control head is here. This is the first car radio offered as an accessory. In 1931, Philco came out with this radio. It's called the Transitone Model 10. These cars originally came with a 4-speed synchromesh transmission, and it didn't work very well. And Chrysler had a factory recall, believe it or not, a factory recall, and they replaced anybody that wanted their 4-speed replaced with a tried and true reliable 3-speed synchro. So that happened to this car. This car has got the 3-speed synchromesh transmission. But if you're used to driving a modern synchromesh transmission, it's kind of funny because the synchromesh is really slow. I mean, you have to wait, for the gears to line up. You don't just shift like you do in a modern car. You have to wait, I'd say 2-3 seconds. So if you're going up a hill, the car might stop. You're starting to see a modern trunk now compared to some of the other ones that have basically a steamer trunk on the back of the car. Now you're starting to see it kind of start to get integrated into the body. This is nothing to do with not wanting women to vote or anything like that. You got to study your history now. This was Prohibition. This was Prohibition, which was repealed about 10 months after this car was built.
Can you tell us a little bit about the difference of the Packard and the Chrysler? And then we'll get into the Packard.
I can. I'll generally tell you that the 3 years between 1929 and 1932 were like 15 years in any other period in automotive history as far as the improvement to the cars went. The Packard is a relatively primitive car, even though it was one of the highest end and best cars you could buy at the time, is relatively primitive compared to the Chrysler. The things it's got that the Chrysler, or things it doesn't have that the Chrysler does have is it's got a non-synchromesh transmission. It's got manual brakes. They're not hydraulic. They're with rods and cables, and it's got doesn't have a fuel pump. It has what you call a vacuum tank, which we'll look at in a minute. There's all kinds of things, and 29 and 30 were the last years of this kind of old pre-World War I technology that the cars still used. And by 1932-33, mostly because they were trying to sell cars, because the Depression didn't help the high-end car sales a lot, they made tremendous strides in an effort to sell the cars.
Now, driving-wise, the Chrysler and the Packard.
The Packard is an illustration of why women didn't drive. I mean, you got to be on a weight program to drive this thing. You can't parallel park it. The Chrysler, you can steer literally with one finger. Like the Chrysler, we got 32 candle power headlights. You can't even tell that they're on. You can't look at the road and see that the headlights are even on. They don't hit the road even. You also got the same driving lights that the Chrysler had, which most people got because the lights were so sort of minimal. Another similarity with the Packard between that and the Chrysler is the what they call a Pines winter front. I described that before, but basically it's a set of vanes behind this rock guard that open and close depending on how hot the engine is. It's a straight 8, 106 horsepower, 384 cubic inch engine. The instruments are fairly rudimentary by today's standards. This is what you call a dual cowl Phaeton. And those were popular in the 20s up through about 1935. And what dual cowl Phaeton means, dual cowl means basically that there's 2 windshields. It's not technically the definition, but for practical purposes, that's what it is. This is the trunk. This is where the term trunk came from. It's literally a trunk. It's a steamer trunk. These were made for these cars. This is an extremely rare one that I found. A guy in St. Louis had it. It's a 40-inch trunk. That's what makes it rare.
I'm here with Patrick Mullin. And the car behind us here is absolutely it's magnificent, and it's from your collection. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, this is a 1928 Lorraine Dietrich. Dietrich was a manufacturer. Their first car was actually in 1897. They did a lot of racing in the turn of the century, and then got out of the racing business. They helped out in World War I with some of the trucks and whatnot, and then after World War I, eventually got back into racing. They were very successful eventually at Le Mans. In 1925, they came in first and third, and in 1926, first, second, and third, which was astounding, and of course got the attention of the people in that world. And so to capitalize on their success, they did several replica chassis of the Le Mans racers, and then put these roadster bodies on the racing chassis. And that's what we have. They only did very few, 6 to 12 maybe, of this kind of configuration. And this is one of the few that are left, and especially in such good condition.
How did you happen to add this to your collection?
This collection, of course, is a result of Peter Mullin starting to collect pre-war French automobiles, and he's been doing that since the 80s, and he has contacts all over the world that know if they want to sell something or something comes up, Peter's somebody to talk to. So he bought this from a gentleman, Rick Christensen, in the early 2000s. Had it restored for the 2010 Pebble Beach Concours. It won a class award there at Pebble Beach. It won Best of Show at the Ventura Motorsport Gathering 2 years ago. Best in Class, Best in Show. And it's a car that during today, while we've been here exhibiting the car, I just have loved people walking by and admiring. They just kind of stop and, oh wow. And it's really wonderful to see their reaction.
It does stand out here with the collection, with all the cars. It does stand out.
Yes, yeah. Interestingly, here at this particular concourse, it's right across the street from Raymond Dietrich, and of course there is a kind of a natural confusion. So we've had a chance to tell people that there are two, Raymond Dietrich, who did the body coach work for American cars, but this French, and it was French, Dietrich was the German name. They did their work in the Alsace-Lorraine area. So they were French cars, but it was a German name, Dietrich, obviously. Eventually, they began calling them the Lorraine Dietrich, so that the French, it made it more palatable to the French people. And actually, in the end, they had dropped the name Dietrich altogether, and they were known as Lorraine. This is known as a Lorraine Dietrich, however. I love opening the hood, showing people some of really unique aspects of this particular motor. One that is immediately evident are the exposed push rods. These are overhead valves. I don't know that I've ever seen it in any other motor myself, but as you can see, the push rods are exposed, all dripping with oil. I hope that's the way it's supposed to be and not a reflection on my driving. I just love this overhead work light. It's really a finely engineered, crafted light. The cord, how that's so neatly wrapped, the light moves back and forth along the bar and can swing from left to right as well. It's an inline 6. Just a very, very interesting engine. Just as would be true today, having a place to store your golf clubs was very important. And so we actually have a compartment here where the owner was able to store their golf clubs. And you see in the back here, we do have a cargo compartment. It almost looks like this would be a rumble seat. It is not. It is just the cargo compartment. As you can tell, this is a convertible. Ordinarily, the car is actually shown with the top down. We did choose to put it up today and have found that it just adds so much to the lines of the car. I'm hoping that we just keep the top up. I really have loved seeing it in this way. Here in the front of the car, we have the double grille with the Lorraine cross on the grille. So this would identify it to any a French person as marking it as coming from the region of Lorraine. And the lights, nothing particularly unusual except this middle light. You can see it's a very concentrated beam, so this would be almost the equivalent of a high beam to illuminate the dark French roads. The beauty is how carefully these are engineered and crafted. Nothing haphazard about this grill or about the bracing, any of this.
I'm here with Leslie Kendall from the Peterson Museum. And what did you bring to the Concours Day?
We have our 1933 Duesenberg disappearing top convertible coupe bodied by Murphy of Pasadena.
Oh, wow. Can we have a closer up look?
You bet you can. Well, let me tell you a little bit about our Duesenberg. Most of the interesting stuff is right up front. We have a 420 cubic inch engine that would originally put out 265 horsepower, but then supercharged to put out 320. But this supercharged setup on our car puts over 400 horsepower. So that's why they could say a Duesenberg owner was passed only when he or she wished to be passed. And another interesting thing about this car is this great local LA connection because it was bodied in Pasadena by Murphy. The building is even still there in Old Town on Colorado Boulevard. But it's one of the kind of unusual, even among Murphys, because it's got a disappearing top. And you could have a disappearing top or not. You could have your doors hinged at the front or in the back. You could have a rumble seat. You could have a trunk. It's whatever you wanted. And if you wanted it on a long wheelbase, they would do that for you. If you wanted it on this short wheelbase, they would certainly do that. And working our way to the very back, we see why they call a trunk a trunk. That's because that's what it was at first. It was something that you could actually remove from your car and bring up to your hotel. Unlike a lot of cars today, the Model J Duesenberg had some of the controls on the steering wheel. On ours, it's the light and the sparks. The lighting system of the car, it controlled the headlights, it controlled the driving lights, it controlled the tail lights even. And the car has twin spotlights that are operated independently and wipers that are actually operated independently too. They're individual. You can have one on and not the other. Everything between your hands and the tires ran in either ball or roller bearings. So this car is extremely interesting to drive. And sitting in the cockpit, it's a little like sitting in an airplane because of all the instruments that you had. An altimeter, you had all kinds of gauges that it almost made you feel like a pilot. And something pretty unusual, you could adjust your brakes from the dashboard. You could have the system adjusted for snow, adjusted for water, adjusted for dry conditions. And it was a very sophisticated car for the day. And it was a marvelous way to go. And even today, it gives modern performance. This car can keep up with anything on the freeway. Let me show you the engine. This is one of the most interesting parts of this car. The thing that you can see right away, it's a double overhead cam. What you can see, though, is that it has 4 valves per cylinder. And today it's hard to find a car that you can't get twin cams and 4 valves, but back then it was a big deal. The Model J was introduced in late 1928 as a 1929. And when you think that in 1929, Ford was just a little 40 horsepower flathead engine, and a Model J Duesenberg put out 265 horsepower, more than double the horsepower rating of its next closest domestic competitor. And this one is even upgraded among Model Js because it's not only the supercharged version. You see this gigantic supercharger, centrifugal supercharger. It's got the two carburetor setup for more efficient breathing. And the flex pipes on the outside, these are actually functional. A lot of cars today put them on afterwards and just kind of look good. But the idea was that there was so much room that was taken up by the supercharger inside, there really wasn't room for the exhaust manifold. So they routed them outside the car. And it also took heat out of the engine and brought it to the outside. So you didn't have all that heat from the exhaust building up inside. So here we have an engine. It's painted apple green enamel with all kinds of aluminum, double overhead cams, 4 valves per cylinder, supercharged. It's everything a classic car should be. The front of a Duesenberg is pretty darn interesting. Lots and lots of chrome, but that's not where it stops. You look at the top and you start with a radiator mascot called the Duesenbird, which actually became standard on the Model Js beginning a little bit into production. You have the gigantic grille, which is one thing that virtually all Model Js had in common. It's the kind of a visual connection that tied them all together. Interesting about the grille, it's not just vertical uprights, they're actually thermostatically controlled shutters. So when it gets colder, they close. When it gets warmer, they open up, let more air through. And moving down a little bit, today we have parking lights and cornering lamps, but back then you had pilot ray driving lights. It actually turned with the front wheels. If you're turning to the right, these lights would turn to the right. Turning to the left, they would turn to the left, and so on. And moving down one more, you had a Duesenberg bumper, which is called the bow tie bumper. And you can see why. It looks a little bit like a bow tie. And again, that's something that gave Duesenbergs a very, very striking family resemblance.
I'm here with Jack and David Curtright. And what did you folks bring to the Concours this year?
We brought a 1929 Model Day Duesenberg with Kirchhoff coachwork on it.
Wow, it's beautiful.
So this car was originally owned by Arthur K. Bourne, a great-grandson of the president of the Singer Sewing Machine Company. He bought it in 1929. It was one of the very first Duesenbergs purchased. He happened to be driving down the California coast one afternoon and stopped to buy gas and ran into a Duesenberg salesman who was driving an early Duesenberg down to Los Angeles to put in the showroom. And he liked it so much that he bought one on the spot. He was kept waiting for this car because so many had been ordered that spring. And so we ordered another one. And it arrived without a body. And he put a Wayman leatherette body on it for a few months. And work was done by a guy named Joseph Kirchhoff. Later in the year, he saw a Kirchhoff production and liked it so much, he asked Kirchhoff to build one for him. And this car is the result.
Our father was an automobile enthusiast from way back and always had a love of Duesenbergs. And when he heard about this car in a junkyard on Main Street in Los Angeles in 1952, he and our mother went down and bought the car. They paid $500 for it. It was a hanging wreck. It was painted black. It had had a rod thrown. The engine was destroyed, but he bought it. In fact, he bought two cars for $1,000 that day. The other one we sold in '64, but we kept this one because it is unique. It was built by Joseph Kirchhoff. He built two Duesenbergs, this being the second of the two. It's called a convertible Berline. It's a dual windshield, no cowl in the back, like a dual cowl Phaeton. Our parents bought it in 1952, hung on to it for years. Father disassembled it, worked on it piecemeal over the years, collected parts, built parts. After he passed away in '94, the family hired the restoration done. Two different restorers. It took 13 years, I believe, to restore the car. It's been done for a couple of years now. So with this car, my siblings and I are living out our parents' dream. They bought the car in 1952 and wanted to restore it and drive it around and show it at various shows. All through our lives, we used to go to the Auburn Court Duesenberg Club meets on the West Coast, and people would always rib our dad. Hey, Gil, when's the old Kirchhoff going to get done? And, well, he passed away in '94, and we finally got it done for them, and now we're running around showing the car. And it's just a very exciting thing for the family. We consider the car a member of the family. So we're very, very proud of it, and we cherish it very much.
Thank you for joining Peninsula Seniors Out and About here at the Palos Verdes Concours d'Elegance. I'm Betty Wheaton. See you next time.